You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
That makes me Bill Thomas.
And we're here with a little CrimeCon after action report. Fresh back from Austin, Texas, it's Bill Thomas.
Yes, indeed. My computer thinks it's on Central Time, and I think so do I. It's a little confusing. Everything I was trying to schedule for this week kept deferring to, I don't know what time it was, Greenwich Mean Time and or Central Time. And I was really confused, and I finally figured out all my devices, which went with me to Austin, now think they live on Central Time.
Oh, no.
So I was, booking other appointments, now that we're back, we're trying to catch up on stuff. Everything is wrong. So we fixed it, but I wasn't quite sure what was going on. I thought for a minute or two it was me. It turned out to be the devices.
It's the device, yeah. Well, we are so glad to have you back. It looked like you had a fantastic time in Austin. Did you?
I did. I wanted to talk with you about it because it was fantastic. It was a great experience. I love Austin. I've been there numerous times and hadn't been there in several years. It was a real different kind of CrimeCon, and I thought we would talk about that. And then, of course, it's probably worth talking about the fact that our original intent, yours and mine, was not to attend CrimeCon this year because of COVID and all that kind of stuff. Fairly late in the game, they added a panel on the Colonial Parkway Murders, and I was asked to attend. And I figured if they're going to have a panel on the Colonial Parkway Murders and the Lover's Lane Murders television series, it would probably be good if I went. So I did.
And this is not the first time that there has been a panel about the Colonial Parkway Murders at CrimeCon. As a matter of fact, the first year that I attended, and maybe it was the first year for you as well. I don't know if you went to Indianapolis or not.
No, I didn't. That would be CrimeCon number 1, and that would be 2017. I thought about going to Indianapolis, didn't go, and then we heard great things about it, and you and I were thinking, let's go to 2018 in Nashville.
And you were asked to do a panel along with Joyce Call Canada, Maureen O'Connell, and Blaine Pardo, who wrote the book about the case. So you guys headed to Nashville, and I decided that I wanted to tag along with you.
And that was a fantastic introduction, I think, for us to CrimeCon.
Yes, it was great. It was absolutely fantastic.
That one had very heavy presence from all the folks we know from XG Productions.
Yes.
Jim Clementi, Tim Clementi, Laura Richards, Lisa Zambetti.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Oh, that's right. Fitz was there too. Yeah. Bobby Chacon was there. So it was a fantastic experience. And CrimeCon at that point was growing by leaps and bounds. Indianapolis had been the first. Kevin Balfe and the team at Red Seat Ventures out of New York had put the convention together. Kevin continues to run CrimeCon. He was incredible. He was like Mr. Everywhere at CrimeCon. That would be number 4, I guess.
Yes.
Right? Is my math okay?
Yep.
Most recently in Austin. CrimeCon just continued to grow by leaps and bounds. So our first one, which is number 2, no one ever calls them by number, by the way, I think, except for us, was Nashville, and it was a fantastic experience. Our panel was well attended. We got great response. I felt like the 4 of us presented very well. Maureen O'Connell, who was on our television series, The Lover's Lane Murders, and one of the investigators, former FBI agent, she kind of moderated and asked fantastic questions. And of course, she's very knowledgeable about the case. Blaine, Joyce, and I answered the questions, and I thought we did a good job, and it was certainly a fantastic experience.
Yes, it was. It was. And the hotel was absolutely excellent as well. I'd never been in a hotel quite like that before. It was brilliant. Unfortunately, I had to stay off-site because by the time I got my CrimeCon pass, all of the rooms in the hotel had filled up. So I stayed across the street in a much less cool hotel. And I just had to Uber back and forth.
In a way, you might have been better off because we were staying at the Opryland Hotel, which is massive.
It's fantastic.
But the thing is, the place is so huge that you would get lost. I mean, literally, it wasn't until the third day that we were there that any of us could find our way from our rooms to the meeting rooms at CrimeCon. You went through this incredibly beautiful kind of labyrinth of waterfalls and rivers. This is all inside, mind you.
Yeah.
It was really cool, but the place is so gigundo that everyone kept saying, I can't find my way back to my room, or when I leave in the morning, I can't find my way to the meeting rooms. And you always ended up going through this incredibly beautiful kind of almost like a rainforest inside the hotel. And I mean, it just went on and on for days. It was gorgeous, but you always felt like you were trucking through there, and then you'd get to one of the forks in the road, with all the signs pointing all the different ways. And you'd be like, that sign could say this way to Timbuktu, and I would be convinced. We had talked about dropping breadcrumbs. It was so crazy big.
It really was.
We all kept getting lost. And then right around the time that the conference ended, which ran Friday, Saturday, Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, by around Sunday afternoon, when it was time to go home, you were starting to get it down where you were like, oh, yeah. And then you'd find shortcuts and stuff, and you'd find out, oh, it doesn't really take me 20 minutes to walk from my room to my first panel of the day. It was a gorgeous hotel. They took great care of us, and they were very kind when we would all ask questions like, how do I get back to my room? Because I'm lost. It happened over and over again, and everybody thought it was them until we started comparing stories, and then they were like, oh yeah, I couldn't find my way home either. So the next year was New Orleans.
Yes, the next year was New Orleans, and that was also a particularly excellent hotel. They're not nearly as big as the Opryland Hotel.
Right.
So we didn't get lost, or at least I didn't get lost.
No.
And it was actually attached to a shopping mall. So you could, if you were bored at any point during the day or needed to get something to eat or whatever, you could always just take the escalator down, go to the shopping mall, see what all was going on over there, get some high-priced New Orleans souvenirs. That was great. And
now they had a river outside.
They did.
You might have heard of it, the Mississippi.
They did.
So you were right there on the water.
And that was, you may have heard us reference last episode that Bill and I went for a walk in the French Quarter and ended up being caught in the most enormous thunderstorm I think I've ever seen. We went back to the hotel just soaked. I actually saw my selfie the other day that I took inside the hotel, and I'm just plastered with water. It was awful. I'm so glad my phone didn't get ruined.
Yeah, it was incredible. And it's funny, I think we took some pictures of the two of us before the rain, and I think we look fine. And then it's a good thing we took the pictures, because otherwise we would have looked like drowned rats. I don't recall ever being quite so wet without actually, jumping in the pool or whatever. And I love New Orleans, and it was really, really fun. It was very hot and very humid, but a fantastic conference. So now, let's see, our first CrimeCon is 2018. Mm-hmm. So this has been 2019.
Yeah, and then COVID.
Right. We flash forward to 2020. And we're all set for Orlando, which I'm going to be frank here, not a big Orlando fan.
Nah, me either.
I'm not a big Florida fan. Forgive me.
Nope.
Florida listeners who are going to send us nasty grams. Not crazy about Florida, the weather, that kind of stuff. So I was kind of disappointed after Nashville and New Orleans. Now remember, I'm a big music guy. So those two towns have great tradition of live music and great musicians and all that stuff, which is important to me. Orlando, not so much. And I was kind of disappointed that Orlando, because I said, man, there's so many great cities around the country. And they've done Indianapolis, they did Nashville, they did New Orleans. And, I was thinking, oh, man, pick another cool city, San Francisco, St. Louis, Detroit, do something interesting like you've done before. Instead, they go with the cruise ship capital of the world. And I mean, I like Disneyland. I've never been to Disney World, but I wasn't excited. So COVID happened.
Yep.
No CrimeCon.
No CrimeCon.
Although we were all booked for it and we were planning on it and the whole thing. And then understandably, Red Seat Ventures had to pull the plug. And so then we flash forward to Austin, hoping in 2021 that the country would be completely back on track. Obviously, we're not quite there, but we're getting there.
We're getting there.
As we said, our original plan was not to attend, so we ended up shifting. I actually thought one of the things we could do, Kristin, is you and I could kind of compare notes, my experience being there and your experience enjoying CrimeCon virtually. So
absolutely.
Your first time attending CrimeCon virtually was Austin just a few days ago. What were your first impressions?
Well, they really did make it about as simple as they could to attend the panels. And they made sure that clearly there's no way to feel like you're 100% in the room along with everyone else. But they had very good cam operators who made sure that they were following the presenters around on the stage. So if you were watching on, say, a computer screen like I was for some of them, you did get the sense, like you got a sense of the size of the room, the whole stage, and you were able to see fairly well the people who were presenting. I would have liked maybe like a little tighter in on the guests so that you weren't getting the majority of the stage. I would have wanted some more close-ups, but that's just me. It was really, really well done. You know, they made the schedule very easy to track and navigate, and they did include some interesting ways where you can meet up with people if you wanted to. You know, there was an app that you could use to message other people who were attending virtually.
Oh, I didn't know about this. This is interesting. So
so there was you got your virtual CrimeCon badge, and then you signed into the Hop In app, and you signed up with your name and your little avatar photo and everything like that. And you would put your role. So I'm co-host of Mind Over Murder, and that way people could message you and say, oh hey, I see you've got a podcast. I got a podcast too. And you had the option also to have a chat feature scrolling alongside whatever panel you were currently attending, so you could interact with people who were on the chat. I find that too distracting.
Right.
And it actually makes me a little nervous watching how many things are going on that I can't keep up with all the reading and the typing and the responding. It just makes me nervous. So
could you minimize that or wipe that off your screen if you just wanted to focus on the action in the room?
Yes, and that's what I did for most of the time. Keeping up with that kind of scroll was just too distracting for me.
Right.
So I just minimized that the whole time.
Right.
But there was a lot of chat going on. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. It definitely seemed like the people who were virtual were interacting quite a lot with each other and with anybody out in the conference who, may have had their phone up, and we, were kind of checking in. So there was definitely the ability to interact with the people who were in Austin.
One of the things I thought was lacking while in the room, because I managed to attend 5 or 6 panels, maybe 7, I had hoped for a little bit more direct interaction. But again, I wasn't reaching for my iPhone during panels very much. I was kind of hoping, like when they went to Q&A, which they did at the end of every session, for at least 10 or 15 minutes. And I often am very curious to hear what people want to know more about when they're in the room. I was hoping there was a way that they were going to integrate questions from people around the country and around the world into the room. And they did not do that. One thing that's worth noting, though, they set up basically a television studio in a room that was adjoining the room where panelists checked in. And they did virtual only sessions from there. And our friend Rebecca Sebastian actually was the host of many, if not all of those sessions. And she said those were very, very successful. What they were trying to do is provide some additional value to the virtual audience. And I think that worked pretty well. She did say that they tried to talk about different things than they'd spoken on the panel. And she did one-on-one, kind of like fireside chat format. I was asking her, because I was lucky enough to have dinner with her on Sunday night. She said the questions then all came from the virtual audience, which gave people who had bought tickets and were participating virtually, a chance to have the kind of direct interaction that I was looking for in the larger room, in the ballroom, if you will. So I thought that was a really cool idea. Now, one of the things I would suggest, I don't know if, Kevin and his team from CrimeCon might not see it this way. I actually thought it might be kind of cool if there was a way for a smaller number of us to sit in that room. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I know Kim Goldman was one of your favorites.
Oh, yeah.
We'll talk about that. But for instance, Kim did a one-on-one session with Rebecca Sebastian, and Rebecca said it was amazing and completely different from Kim's large-scale discussion, which obviously someone could watch remotely, and they could also see the virtual discussion with Kim as well if they chose to. So it depended on, your schedule and, obviously, unless you were going to sit down in front of your computer all day, Friday afternoon, Saturday, Sunday, which is like a full-time job.
Right.
And you had other things you had to do, and lots of other people did too. It gave you some options. So I thought they added some cool features that I think benefited people that were attending from around the world.
No, I agree with you for sure. And I did not ultimately end up doing what you just said, which is like, let me sit down and watch for hours and hours, because it would have been too much. Certainly the years that we went, you and I would go to some panels, but then we'd walk around Podcast Row, then we'd stop and take a break and see some people one-on-one or go out to lunch. And so even when you're at actual CrimeCon, at least for us, it was never just panel after panel after panel after panel.
Right.
We always had a ability to take a break. And so that's pretty much what I did on Saturday and Sunday is, okay, well, I can go to, as boring as it sounds, I can go do my laundry.
Well, but that's...
and I've got a panel at 2.
Right. But there were other things that you needed to do, whether it's get some exercise, do your laundry, grade some papers. Get outside and see the sun. You don't want to just be staring at a screen for your entire weekend. It wouldn't feel like much of a break.
No, certainly not.
If you did that. Now, my impression being there in person for the third time, first time in Austin, couple of things. I thought the hotel was beautiful and the setup was very clean and organized and very well done. Signage was great. The volunteers were fantastic. They were incredibly helpful. It was very interesting to be there. You're masked up for the entire flight. I did 2 flights, changed planes, the whole thing. And so you're masked up from the minute you walk into the airport until the minute I jumped out of my Lyft car at the hotel. But then you go inside the hotel and nobody's wearing a mask. Hotel staff are wearing masks and volunteers were. But the attendees, we took off our masks, which felt a little naked, actually. I'm like, did I forget something here? So
it's weird, right?
Yeah. Because the feeling is that if you're vaccinated and you're in this kind of bubble, but you're in this bubble with 1,600 people. That was the number I heard unofficially. I don't know if they've released an official number. CrimeCon this time around was much smaller, much more scaled down. All of this, I think, due to COVID. There were very, very strong panels, but it wasn't quite as star-studded. As it's been in the past. For example, Oxygen is a major sponsor. Therefore, NBC, which owns the Oxygen network, is also a big sponsor. So, for instance, the Dateline NBC people, and I think they'd been there for 2 years in a row, and, they'd be all over the place. And so you see, celebrities isn't my favorite word, but well-known television and motion picture personalities who've been involved with true crime or true crime type stories all over the floor and, walking the halls and stuff and stopping for autographs and selfies and all that kind of stuff that, they do. But for example, you could meet the Dateline NBC people and have your picture taken and that kind of thing. This year, Dateline NBC had a gigantic display, but cardboard cutouts of the Dateline stars who were, household names in the true crime space. Things like that were very noticeable, that you could tell there were fewer attendees, although the people were incredibly positive and enthusiastic. And as I said, the volunteers and attendees, there were a ton of people on Podcast Row, but not all of the podcasters that you and I know. Many of them were attending virtually as well. COVID seemed to be the overriding theme as to why people weren't attending CrimeCon in Austin this year. In some ways, it was a little easier to get around because things weren't quite so crowded. Mm-hmm. And so you'd go into a ballroom, which might have been set up for 1,000 people, and there were 300 people in the room, as opposed to 900 people in the room the previous years. In that way, it was kind of easier to get around and you had a little bit more access, but it didn't feel quite as, I don't know if frenzied is the right word, but there was a real incredible energy to our first two CrimeCons because there's so many people and so many true crime fans and presenters and so on. This year wasn't quite all that. It was fantastic and interesting, and I learned a lot, and I saw a lot of people and met even more folks I wanted to connect with, but it wasn't quite the same energy level, I think, as previous years.
I get the feeling that everyone is going to decide to go to CrimeCon Vegas next year, and I get the feeling the energy level is going to be insane.
Yes.
And crazy over the top. And I'm sort of wondering if because they have two hotels that they are using, Paris Vegas and Bally's Vegas, I'm wondering if that's just because they're expecting huge numbers.
I think so. And almost everybody that was there was really excited about Las Vegas. I think every person I talked to was planning on being in Las Vegas. And then we were hearing from other people that were not there physically this time around that were definitely planning on being in Las Vegas. So there was messaging back and forth, and there was a lot of talk about how exciting CrimeCon 2022 is going to be. April
29th through May 2nd. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we probably ought to book our rooms. We probably ought to, because I want to stay at Paris Vegas for sure.
And I haven't looked at a map, but people were talking about it. I'm already looking at the discussion groups for CrimeCon 2022. People were discussing the two hotels. And as far as I understand from the conversation, it looks like Paris and Bally's are adjoining hotels, and the meeting rooms are somewhere in the middle. So we may be dropping breadcrumbs on our way to the panels and whatnot. It was a very fun, kind of more intimate affair this year than CrimeCons in the last couple of years. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after these messages. One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helps solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
Welcome back to Mind Over Murder.
Ultimately, I think when we compared note on your final day there, it turns out that we actually didn't have a lot of crossover in terms of what panels we watched. I was actually really surprised because I kept going, well, wait, you must have gone to this one, right? And you were like, no, I went to this other one.
Yeah. I thought that was funny because sometimes you and I would go to things together, and then other times there were situations where you said, no, I really want to go to this. And I'd say, oh, I really want to go to that. And keep in mind, everybody, if you haven't been, they schedule 4 and 5 things at the same time, so you have choices. Yep. And so sometimes my top choice was not yours and vice versa. So we would split up and you'd go to one thing and I'd go to another. Interestingly, this happened even though you were virtual and I was in person. What was your favorite of the panels that you went to?
Kim Goldman, for sure.
Everybody said this. So tell us about it.
She's extraordinary, first of all. It was the first panel that made me flat out ugly cry.
Oh.
I mean, it was...
Well, that part I wasn't happy to hear.
Well, no, but I actually think that I think it's cathartic to be able to have that kind of release of emotion. And clearly, I'm not going to say like she planned it that way, because I don't think that was her. I don't think she wanted to be in a room full of sobbing people.
But I heard from people that were there, they said she was amazing and it was incredibly moving. Now, obviously, she is Ron Goldman's sister.
Yes.
And has been an advocate in what we all call through gritted teeth the OJ Simpson case, which is really shouldn't be called that.
No.
He is the perpetrator.
And so she's really been a tireless victims advocate, which is how she describes herself.
Right.
For making sure that the families are treated not only respectfully, but that they receive, how did she put it? She said, we want the families of the victims to receive the same rights as the criminals do in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she described how her family had to fight for seats in the courtroom and she calls him the killer. She does not call him OJ.
That's interesting. Killer. I share her perspective on that as a sibling of a murder victim. She calls him the killer? Is that what she said?
She just says the killer, yes. Yeah. So she said the killer's family had 14 seats in the courtroom, and there were days when she and her dad had to fight for there too.
When you told me this, I was so floored that the Goldman family would have to fight for seats in the courtroom where, at least at that point, the accused killer of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman is on trial. And I was shocked that the accused family would have all these seats available to them, and yet the victim's family had to fight for literally for a place in the courtroom to witness this critical trial.
She also mentioned that during those critical moments in the trial, when, for example, Ron's autopsy photos were being shown, or when crime scene photos were being shown, they were told, you can't leave the courtroom. You're either in here for the whole thing or you're out of here for the whole thing. You're not allowed to go in and out. And so she described, how devastating it is to watch your brother's murdered body be flashed across the screen for an entire courtroom to see. And even worse, she said, when you've got the killer sitting over there and smirking at you the entire time. I don't know how she didn't go over, the rails in the courtroom.
The idea that they wouldn't be able to leave the room for a few minutes during an hour or however long that took, I'm sure it probably felt like forever to them. And, we've had to deal with the crime scene photos ourselves being leaked. We've not talked about this a lot here, but I've seen the crime scene photos now from the Colonial Parkway murders. Am I sorry? You bet. And I can't unsee them now. And it's really, really unfortunate. And I sure wouldn't want to be in a courtroom while those photos of her brother were being shown. And yes, you can close your eyes, but you don't know when that part of the presentation is over or whether they'll be referenced again. It just compounds the horror of the entire experience, I think, for them.
Yeah. She was really the amount of love and grief that she still has for her brother, 27 years on. And she mentioned it's actually 2 days from now. The 27th anniversary for her is June 12th. She had mentioned, she said, we're getting up to the anniversary. This is hard. This is awful. And she said, I'm going to have harder days coming up soon, but I have to do this for my brother. And, she cried a lot, which is fine. And the pictures that CrimeCon put up afterward of people sitting there in, the ballroom watching her with tears and Kleenexes and everything like that. I do not blame them at all for that kind of grief. Like I said, I sat there and ugly cried, like from the very first minute. She did something that I thought was very interesting, and it was funny. She had a little minute of self-deprecation in there at the end, but the panel opened with messages from Ron's answering machine, and it starts off with, "Hey Ron, it's 10:30. Are we going to the gym? I'll call you later."
A friend of his
hey,
or something?
Ron. Hey Ron, it's 10:45. You planning on coming into work today? Haven't heard from you. And then the messages continued, and it's people saying, "Hey Ron, I just heard your name on the news. I hope this isn't you. Call me."
Yeah.
And it just continues. And of course, the messages get more frantic as they're from people who are going, Ron, I keep hearing your name. Is this you? Call me. I need to know you're okay.
Yeah.
And then the last message, see, you're getting all emotional talking about it. The last message was from a friend who said, Ron, I know it's you on the news, but I wanted to hear your voice again. Mm-hmm. And his voice breaks and the message ends. And then she came out on stage and she's crying already, but she kind of faces everybody and she goes, well, that seemed like a good idea 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it probably did. But now I'm getting emotional. It might have been a tough place for her to start from, although that was going to be a difficult segment for her no matter what. Especially when you get to the place where his friend is leaving him a message knowing he's never going to hear Ron's voice again.
But she said that she did it to show the amount of genuine love and affection and friendship that her brother had in her life, because she wants people to understand that Ron is not just a victim. Yeah. And she said, during all of the coverage on the case, so often he was relegated to Nicole's friend or the other victim. Yeah. And she said, he's not just the other victim. His name is Ronald Lyle Goldman. Mm-hmm. And it was so important for her to give her brother his identity back, his voice back, and for people to know he wasn't just a waiter.
I think that's very powerful. And, our celebrity-obsessed culture tends to do that over and over again, whether it's a murder victim or an accident victim. They'll say a helicopter crash, so-and-so died, and 3 others. And you're like, really?
Yeah. Who are the other 3? They have names.
Really? Yeah. They have names.
Yeah.
And, what do you mean, and 3 others? Like in an airplane crash, typically there's going to be somebody who's a pilot or something like that. Like we couldn't say their names. There really isn't enough ink or air time to say.
Yeah.
I understand that they may go with the most prominent, well-known name first. But I do think that happened to Ron Goldman. And without an ounce of disrespect to Nicole Brown Simpson, who deserved to be mentioned, of course. There were only 2 people that were murdered in that case. You'd think they could have mentioned both of their names in the overwhelming majority of the coverage. And she's absolutely right that did not happen, and that's a shame.
She really has done extraordinary work beyond just coming to CrimeCon. We know she's been very vocal about her feelings about the verdict in the trial, the, of course, acquittal. Oh, spoiler alert for those of you guys that don't know that. Acquittal in the criminal case and the guilty verdict in the civil one.
I'm glad we're able to laugh about it now, because I wasn't laughing back then.
No. And it was, I'm sure we both remember where we were when the verdict came down for that. And, she has written a number of books at this point now. I ordered both of them because I'm me.
And you always want more true crime books for your true crime bookshelf.
Yes. So I ordered both of her books. The first one is called Can't Forgive, and the second one is called Media Circus, which she co-wrote with a journalist, and she interviews the families of very big, specific tragedies that happened in a media circus. So, for example, Deborah Tate.
Interesting.
She talks about her sister, her sister Sharon's murder. Eric Garner's parents, she interviewed them. The wife of the Amish shooter. Uh-huh. And this was a case I hadn't heard of before, which is really odd for me. You'd think I would have heard of it. But she took several high-profile cases and interviewed those families and talked a lot about the role of media, how much damage the media can actually do to a family, either wittingly or unwittingly, as they cover a major case like that.
Very interesting topics and discussion.
Very, very interesting. And of course, I've been listening to her podcast called Confronting OJ Simpson. Mm-hmm. I cannot recommend this enough for anybody who is interested in learning more about that case. I learned a lot of stuff that I had absolutely no idea about. And she does interview the heavy hitters, Marcia Clark, Tom Lang, Chris Darden, who was at CrimeCon New Orleans, who was hysterical. I loved listening to him.
And is a fantastic presenter in addition to being a brilliant guy.
Yeah, he was absolutely wonderful. I loved listening to him. And she even interviewed two of the jurors from the case, both of whom voted to acquit.
Yeah, interesting.
And it was very interesting. She did ask both of them, would you have voted the same way now, knowing what you know so many years on? And one of them said he would have voted to convict, and the other said no, he would still have voted to acquit.
There were heavy moments, and then there were lighthearted moments. I attended a series of fantastic panels. The ethics in true crime discussion with Sarah Turney and Kelsey German from the Delphi case was fantastic. They were talking about a lot of things that have happened and that have happened to these two women as part of their advocacy work. That was a fascinating discussion, and two people that we both very much admire. And then at the same time, there were lighthearted moments. Like I was invited to do True Crime Trivia, which is 8 podcasters from various shows. We did sort of a game show, and they asked questions of us. And Rebecca Sebastian, whom we mentioned, is the host of this True Crime Trivia game. So it takes place on stage, and so it's 2 podcasters at a time competing, and we're each competing for a contribution to a true crime or true crime-related charity that we support. So I was playing for our friends at the Cold Case Investigative Research Institute, and I started off, and I got a big laugh from the crowd here, I started off by apologizing to our friends at the Cold Case Investigative Research Institute for how poorly I was going to be playing, because without Kristin there, Kristin, as those of you who listen know, she's the reader and the book hound, and so she knows more about true crime trivia than just about anybody. And of course, without her, I was completely lost and proceeded to get thumped. So it was 2 podcasters up on stage and then a member of the audience. So that was kind of fun too. But we had a great time because no one was really bitter about winning or losing. It was just more a matter of entertainment and having some fun. And so it was fun to have something that was lighthearted as well.
Oh, yeah, that sounds great.
There were other heavy panels too. One panel that was incredibly informative, and this won't surprise anybody who follows us. David Middleman was there from Othram Labs. I will confess, we had urged David to attend CrimeCon. His company, Othram, their lab is in the Woodlands, Texas, which is outside Houston, so they're only about 2 hours away. David presented, and he presented by himself and just went up and sort of gave almost like a TED Talk format where it was just him, out there on the big stage. And he was amazing because he was presenting the work that Othram's doing, how they can help with cold cases, how they can help families, law enforcement agencies, and communities achieve some degree of justice through the work that they're doing in breaking cold cases and helping to identify unidentified remains. And he offered a number of examples, had a fantastic PowerPoint presentation with slides and photographs, nothing graphic. And he was fantastic. And from where I was seated, I couldn't see the fact that David had monitors aimed back at him with his PowerPoint presentation. Because I said, man, you were so fantastic. I jumped up on stage afterwards and gave him a big hug. Yes, we're hugging and shaking hands again now, folks. Which is, again, that was sort of weird to actually have physical contact with someone that you're not directly related to and living through the pandemic with. But I said to David, I wasn't sure how you kept your place because he just hit you with story after anecdote, pictures of the lab. And, it was really amazing. And it went over extremely well with the audience. Mm-hmm. But then I realized, you were following along.
Got monitors.
Yeah, he's got the monitors with his PowerPoint presentation. He said, as long as he's got his bullet points, he knows what he wants to say. That was fantastic. And then another panel that mixed some fun with a very serious message was Cheryl McCollum's.
Yay, Mac.
Yeah, Mac was so great. They called it Ride Along with Mac and Company. And it was Cheryl McCollum, Karen Greer, and all the experts they're using on their Emmy Award-winning show CSI Atlanta. And I got to touch her Emmy. And I actually think I appeared in some photographs with the Emmy.
Yes, there is one of you, Mac, and Dr. Laura with the Emmy.
So I got to touch the Emmy, which was really fun. And Mac is so life-affirming and positive and hysterically funny. And at the same time, they were discussing a very serious case, an unsolved rape murder in the Atlanta area.
Nicole Smith, yeah.
Yeah, Nicole Smith. And her mother was there. And of course, all these experts presented. And guess what? They've added David Middleman. I think he may appear on the show next season.
Oh, very cool.
Because he's coming in and Othram's going to be doing some DNA testing on the Smith case. There were some very lighthearted moments because Mac is just so funny. But at the same time, then Mrs. Smith spoke last on the panel. She was probably the fifth or so person to speak. Of course, then, she kind of almost like testified, she's this beautiful African-American woman. And she spoke from a very heartfelt, sort of impassioned place. And then, of course, by the end, not a dry eye in the house.
Yeah.
Because she was so amazing. So, and I had a chance to, say hello to her. Karen Greer, who's a longtime television host and Emmy Award winner herself. I had a chance to chat with her one-on-one, and she's absolutely lovely and amazing. Really a fantastic presentation that kind of mixed a little bit of high and low, if you know what I mean, in terms of there was laughter and there was tears, the full range of human emotion.
Another person who really brought that same thing was Nancy Grace, who is also one of Mac's very dear friends. I felt like you can't really go any place with Mac without being introduced to somebody that she knows and loves. Like, I think she knows everybody pretty much. Nancy Grace had a panel. She is definitely a fan favorite. And, she's, as a Southerner, I don't think anybody's as Southern as Nancy Grace.
No, probably not.
So she's got that wonderful accent, and she's got some really funny Southern expressions. And so she was discussing some of the more noteworthy cases over the last year or so. She talked about Vanessa Guillen. She talked about Lori Vallow and, her crazy doomsday mom sort of deal.
Oh, God, yes.
She talked about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. But,
all our favorites.
Yeah, I know all these people we've been talking about. She did insert, enough humor that every once in a while in there, you get a smattering of laughter as she would say something or do something maybe a little bit off color.
But that's okay. And it also provides that light moment to kind of balance some of the heavy stuff.
Probably the other panel, other than yours, of course, that I found particularly interesting was with Carrie Rawson. And she is the daughter of Dennis Rader, the BTK killer.
Yes. And I had a chance to chat with her. She's a lovely, lovely person.
That takes a really different kind of strength, the strength that I don't know that I would have, that I don't think a lot of people would have, frankly, to be able to live with the kind of trauma and not despair, because she's doing pretty well. I mean, she's doing great, but the kind of trauma and sadness that comes along with knowing that a parent that you have loved for years and even idolized a little bit, to learn that that parent is a monster. That has got to be a different kind of grief than I think most people will ever end up having to experience. I haven't read her book. Probably that's surprising to you, but of course
we have to fix that. Jeez.
Yeah, it's on my list. I'm going to go to Barnes & Noble tomorrow after school. It's on my list.
Some of these books are at the library too. You could just go read them.
That one is not at the library. I checked.
Okay.
I checked after her panel. I don't know. It's a thing. I just like to have a book, and I like to highlight it and do all that stuff.
Having seen your house and your many books and DVDs, I understand.
I know you've seen exactly how big my collection is. It's not hoarding if it's books or DVDs.
This is true.
Carrie Rawson was particularly amazing, and dealing with the things that she has requires a source of strength that, quite frankly, I don't know where she gets it from, but I really enjoyed listening to her. She was a very strong and interesting conversationalist for sure. Well, and that's the after action report for the other panels on CrimeCon, but we're going to get to the most important part, at least for the team at Mind Over Murder here, which is the panel about the Lover's Lane murders and the Colonial Parkway murders with Bill Thomas, Loni Coombs, and David Carabinas. And we will talk about that next episode. Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.